Good afternoon, Nicosia. When I was 13 years old, back in the pre-internet world, I was sitting in a history class learning about the Industrial Revolution and the 1929 crisis. As the teacher was explaining what the Keynesian virtuous circle was and telling us that this is what got the Western world out of the crisis, she said something along the lines of, the main idea of it was implemented by Ford, who said, my employees need to be financially able to be my consumers. Why? Because increasing consumption, increased production, increased jobs, increased buying power, and therefore consumption. And as she drew on the board this virtuous circle, I looked at it in wonder. I looked at this board thinking, how can the C of consumption becomes the C of citizenship? How can the P of production become the P for peace? And I started daydreaming and thinking, how will the teacher at the end of the 21st century teach her students how the world, how the people of the beginning of the century were able to get out of these dark times of crisis and war? How are they able, 100 years after Afghanistan, Somalia, the Gulf War, how are they able to get out of it? Will she be presenting a virtuous cycle? And if so, how would it look like? Is that even possible? And since that day, I have been haunted by this question. To understand the point of departure of my reflection, I need to tell you a little bit about myself and my existential crisis as a teenager. See, I'm Franco-Egyptian, one parent from each country, born and raised in France. And I was always asked to define my identity. Am I more French or am I more Egyptian? Which box do I belong to the most? I could never really quite answer this because it meant choosing between my parents. One day, in class, I was told that my dad's country colonized my mom's country. And then when I went home, I saw two loving parents who agreed on pretty much everything, especially on saying no to my many requests. Not much long after, on the news, I was told that Sunni Muslims were fighting with Shia Muslims. So I turned around to my mother and I said, "What are you?" And she looked at me with despair in her eyes, because that was probably the millionth question that evening. And she said, "I'm Muslim. Stop with your silly questions." So I scratched my head. I said, "Okay." Went back to school, and the teacher started talking about the war, and I told her, "They're all Muslims." She told me, "No, there's categories of Muslims." And I thought, all right, these grown-ups are just too complicated for me. I don't get it. That makes no sense. And since then, I've been asked almost on a daily basis to say what my identity is. Who am I? And one day, in deep frustration, after hearing that question again, I looked at the person and I said, "I'm a human. Isn't that enough?" That moment was a game changer for me. For the first time in my life, I was able to relate to every single person on this planet. I was part of a larger species. We were one. 20 years later, I have dedicated my life and career to advancing citizenship, still haunted by this question. I've worked with universities and faculties to get them to institutionalize in their own DNA, in their curriculum, civic education. I started Civic Leadership Academy in the Middle East. And I worked with rural women in Upper Egypt to understand what citizenship would mean to them, how would that translate in their lives, and engage with a variety of stakeholders. I was also myself a citizen in the streets of the Middle East during the Arab Spring. And all these endeavors have brought me to engage in dialogue from people from all walks of life, from Portland, Oregon to Mafraq, Jordan. And as I spoke with all of them, three main questions always came up. It did not matter whether it was government officials, CEOs, or the women from rural Egypt, these three questions always came up, and I'd like to share those with you. The very first one is one that we often hear. This is how it is here. This is our culture, and this is how we work. It's been working for years, so why should we change anything? Well, I'd like to share my 2 cents on why we should change something. 1.2 billion is the number of people nowadays living on less than $1.25 a day. 1.2 billion is also the number of people living in 2015 with no access to electricity. Nearly 1 billion people entered the 21st century without being able to read a book or even sign their own name. That's the equivalent of the entire Indian population. Yesterday, 22,000 children died from poverty. And today, it's the same. Yesterday, 21,000 people died from hunger-related causes, while higher-income countries together waste as much food as the entire African continent produces in a year. Let's look at our conflicts. So as you can see, good news. Since 2008, the number of conflicts actually reduced. But oh wait, bad news. The number of fatalities more than tripled. And from what we see in the news every day, it's not necessarily going in the good direction. So let's go back to our question. This is how we've done it for years. Maybe we need to change something after all. So now, if we have the will and we recognize that it's time for change for all of us as humans, the second question I get is, I don't have time to change the world. I got kids, I got a job, I have to commute, I have household duties. Well, all of that is absolutely true. It takes time. But let's look a little bit about how we spend our lives, how we spend our time. According to the study that was done in the United States and could probably be applied everywhere in higher income countries, once we are done with our household, our commute, our work, watching TV, our social life, we have 7 years left. That's 2,740 days. That's as much time as we spend watching TV. So, the answer to me looks like we do have time. It's just how we choose to spend it. But let's break down this initial question again. Since we have time and it's time for change, what do we mean by change? How do we do this? What is this? What we're really looking at is how can individuals organize themselves in a society to reach coexistence and growth at the same time. So what this question highlights is the qualitative interaction between individuals, because if we think about it, a society is just a mere organized group of individuals. So how can these interactions be the catalyst, be the drive for this? Leading change always sounds so daunting. For the most part, we have been told over and over again that changing the world is for hippies or tree huggers or dreamers, and that we're drops in a stormy ocean, and that at some point or another we need to give up our ideals, grow up, get a job, and make a living. And that point always got me. Why would making a living somehow be mutually exclusive to making this world a better place? Don't doctors save lives? Don't architects and urban planners build the cities in which we live? Aren't the best doctors the ones who embody transparency and empathy? Aren't the best urban planners those who make us live in green cities, in sustainable ones, in interactive ones where the social fabric can be harmonious? So no, I doubt that they're mutually exclusive, giving us twice the amount of time. Now I'd like to share 3 out of the many, many, many examples out there of how some people have done this. Some of these examples you're probably familiar with. The first one is one that I'm sure you all know, carpooling. Isn't that the most simple idea? We live next door, we go to the same place every day, let's go together. That one sentence that was pronounced by so many people around the world nowadays allowed for economical savings, first bottom line, second bottom line, for building the social fabric because you get to know your neighbor who might be different from you and you get to learn about his or her culture. And the third one, which impacts all of our family of humans, the environmental one. But it took that one sentence. That's it. A second example, it's called the socket ball. The socket ball normally during the day looks like a normal soccer ball without the lamp. The inventor thought the places that 1 billion people where they don't have electricity, often the kids love playing football there. So why don't I make a football that generates electricity as they play so that at the end of the day they can plug a lamp and do their homework and hopefully reduce that other 1 billion who entered the 21st century without being able to read a book. Simple but brilliant. That third example is called the Barefoot College. It's an Indian gentleman who, once he was finished with his studies, technology, engineering, he went to rural India, where he's from, and he started embedding himself in the community and discovered the wealth of knowledge that rural India had and that he never learned in the class. And so he started to create, literally, a barefoot college where all this wealth of knowledge could be shared. And the technology that he was bringing was coming to complement this knowledge rather than supplant it, rather than starting everything over again. These three examples show us that all of these innovators, all of these change makers, all of these everyday leaders just took a simple problem and empowered themselves within their own world, within their own strength and abilities, and made it move forward, and they impacted directly thousands and thousands of lives, and indirectly all of our lives. So now I would like to share with you how do they do this. As I met all of them, as I met all these inspiring everyday leaders, I've come to notice that there was a number of criteria, there was a number of aspects about them that was across the board. Firstly, they made the choice. It's as simple as that. Said, today, I am part of the solution. I won't be part of the problem anymore. They learn about themselves, and for that matter, about everything else. They're self-aware. They accept their strength, embrace their strength, but they also embrace their weaknesses. And they hire around them their weaknesses rather than their alter egos. They demystify change. When you're around them, you feel like changing the world is so easy, it's a piece of cake. And they do that by simply problem solving. They look at a problem and they say, I'm going to solve it. They don't wait for someone to do it. They don't go by and say, oh, someone take care of it. And they just say, that's a problem. I can do it. They're passionate. I am sure you have all sat at some point in your life in a room with someone laughing to tears, and you just couldn't help but laugh. Same goes for passion. When someone's passionate, you can't help but being drawn to them. And that's the spark. Well, what gets people to keep following your idea, embrace, and be part of that solution with you is the credibility, is the ethos. It starts with their words, and it ends with their action. They use their networks. And by network, I know we're in the 21st century and it's all about Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook and whatnot, which are critical and important. But right now I want to talk about the everyday network. The baker, the plumber, the teacher, the neighbor. They engage their community. These real people that we walk by every day, and if we say hello, that's already a good thing. They engage all of them in a genuine and authentic way. And because they're so authentic, they're not scared to fail. They fail, they embrace their failure, they learn from it, and they go back on the road. And they might fail again, but because they learn each time, it's beautiful to see them getting back up and one day reaching their success. This is what makes them so intimate to us. They shift their perspectives to embody compassion and transparency. We live in a world where compassion does not have enough of its place, unfortunately, and so does empathy. They empathize with everyone, even the most different person, and they're compassionate towards them, and that can only be inspiring to those around. They observe and listen before they talk and act. In a society where we should always have an opinion, they learn to observe, to look around them, to breathe in the society, the community, its needs, its strength, its assets. They listen to the people around them. They take into account their opinion and in all of its diversity, because they understand that however hard it is to come up to a decision with a diverse group of people, when you reach that consensus, it's one that is here for good and which provides the right basis for the right social contract. And finally, they move forward. They understand that life is made of setbacks, disappointments, but that it's okay, it's all part of the game, and they always get up and move forward. Talking about moving forward towards a peaceful coexistence, as it was mentioned, I am from Paris, and I would like, therefore, to dedicate this talk to all the victims of terrorism around the world, in Mali, Nigeria, Syria, Lebanon, and home.